Hello, YouTubers, and thanks for watching my first amateur documentary. And I do stress amateur. I'm in no means professional. I'm a history student at Northern Illinois University studying for a master's degree. And I know commentary is not really meant for documentaries, but I kind of want to do a commentary 1 year later because I want to say some things that I didn't really get the chance to say while editing this, and also to dispel many misconceptions. And this is actually my first YouTube hit. I mean, but prior to this, I couldn't pay people to watch my YouTube videos. As of now, at the time of this commentary, 12,475 views, 89 likes, 17 dislikes. So I'd say it's a success. But before I go any further, I want to give a special honorary shout out to James Oberg. James Oberg believes that the Lost Cosmonauts are completely disproven. For me, the jury is still out. I mean, Oberg can be right. I mean, he could be right, but, historians really can't prove a negative. But what they can do is they can disprove some arguments and go through a process of elimination to strongly support a negative, which is... I do kind of lean towards the Lost Cosmonauts existing in this because I think that some of the conspiracy theorists who believe the Lost Cosmonauts exist don't really make good counter-arguments. So I just wanted to add some of my own findings in addition to the material that people are already familiar with if they're familiar with the topic of the Lost Cosmonauts. Just add additional explanations, and if James Oberg or any other historian cares to disprove those additional explanations, which I will highlight throughout this commentary, then great. Then Lost Cosmonauts did or didn't exist. Either way, this amateur documentary seems to help. And I want to thank you, Mr. Oberg, for putting your website in the comment section. And yes, I did read your book, and people be nice to him. He's a professional. He was very professional with his comment. So, thanks for that. And this is Konstantin Sistovoski. I always have a problem pronouncing his names, and I probably mispronounced it in the documentary. But it's just a shame that not too many people are familiar with him today, unless you live in Russia, because this was the guy who basically figured out how to get into space. The use of liquid fuel propellants and combustion chambers, the concept of staging, the speed and altitude an object will need to get into orbit and escape velocity. He basically figured all this out. I mean, he's the reason why we have spaceflight these days. And what I was getting at here at this point was that there was a Soviet space culture that was born because Sistovoski was a Russian, and he figured out how to get into space. So the Russian people say, hey, the person who figured out to get in space was a Russian, so it is our duty as Russians to to lead humanity into the final frontier. I mean, this is our domain because the grandfather of modern rocketry, was Russian. Man, at first, Khrushchev was a little disinterested in a space program until Korolev launched Sputnik, and he saw the international reaction and decided to get on board with the space program. And I believe that he and the Soviet leadership found this as a means for domestic propaganda in order to not just to compete with the United States in ideals, but the Russian people wanted to go into space. So Khrushchev has the opportunity to win their loyalty by granting them space flight. You say, people, fellow comrades, you want to go into the unknown? I will take you into the unknown. Just remain loyal. So I think that I honestly believe that the space program was more focused on domestic propaganda than the United States. And every time they bested the United States, that can always be used not just to humiliate the United States in the early days, but also to win the support of the Russian people. And I got great respect for the Russian space program. Not just the successes that they came up with in the early days of the space race, but rather because of the Salutes. I mean, the Salutes started out, very abysmally. You couldn't ask for a worse start. But come Salyut 6 and Salyut 7, those were the game changers. and they found more success than they thought they'd get out of those. But that's a topic for another documentary that I might do sometime in the future. Coming up right here is a disgraced cosmonaut that James Oberg was actually very interested in, and yes, I did read his book, Gregory Nuyubov, and he James Oberg, that is, succeeded in tracking him down and finding out what had happened to him, especially figuring out who the missing cosmonauts in these airbrushed photos were. Although I could use this airbrushing tactic for another argument, a lot of the moon landing conspiracy theorists think that those so-called proofs that the moon landing was fake was left in those footages by people who were trying to trickle in the truth. Airbrush anyone? I mean, NASA could have airbrushed their photographs when they didn't. It's just so weird. I've never seen a more disproven conspiracy theory than the moon landing hoax, yet no people more stubborn. The 9/11 conspiracy theorists aren't as stubborn. The JFK assassination conspiracy theorists aren't stubborn. And, and yet they persist. And you want to know what? I think I might do an amateur documentary about that. So, if you think I should, feel free to put that in the comments. Documentary basically saying that the moon landing hoax conspiracy theory is complete bullshit. Even though I'm kind of leaning on this one right here a little bit. But, if you can convince me that they did or didn't exist either way, then then I would make up my mind, yeah. I just want to tell you, this footage of the Netherlands catastrophe is the real footage. But none of this footage was actually all that hard to get. There really wasn't any copyright protection, even though I did get a copyright notice when I posted this. But fortunately, the copyright owner was ready and willing to let me continue with the post. So I just got a little heads up right there. But no strike, no copyright strike, thank God. And that's basically all I did. I basically just added this together and then did voiceover, which is really not that hard. It's anybody can do it. It's just what makes it separates the good ones from the bad ones is how you deliver it. And this is Professor Asif Siddiqui from Fordham University. I did a lot of reading on him, and if he is definitely on the history of space exploration, which is actually something I want to do if I would go for a doctorate. Mr. Siddiqui, if you think I'd make a good doctoral thesis candidate on the history of space exploration, my information is available on request. But, maps like this was taken from Google Maps, and I just took that into, Paint, that program Paint, and put the dots on there and just do a little editing. It's actually very easy to do. And it was Siddiqui that, I read in his book how these workers, these workers knew what the parts were for, but no, the workers who made the parts prior to this did not know what they were for. So it's easy to, it wasn't possible that there were Vostok spacecrafts that were that flew but were done away with on the records, classified or anything. Possibly. And this was, according to Siddiqui and Professor Siddiqui, if I read you wrong, please correct me. But this was footage that of Yuri Gagarin after he completed space flight. Now, the space flights happened. We know that. But according to Siddiqui, what we're seeing in these footages is not Yuri Gagarin preparing to go into space, but a Yuri Gagarin that already had been to space, which is reenacting this so that the Soviets would have something to show the world. Although you do see the water vapor on the side of the rocket, which means it's fueled because the water, the condensation can freeze up on there. So maybe the rocket was going somewhere that day, but It's possible Yuri Gagarin wasn't on that rocket. He was on an earlier rocket when there was no television cameras whatsoever. And this is where I finally get into the Judica-Cordiglia brothers. I know one of them is dead. I don't know if the other one is alive. But, if anybody's familiar with the topic of the Lost Cosmonauts, you know who these guys are. It's just... and this is, just one of those things I wanted to explain. Oberg, in his argument, said that, these alleged lost cosmonauts were tracked by the Cordiglia brothers, but none of the American tracking stations in the United States or in Europe were able to track anything. However, I did see one primary source that said that the United States had a policy of accepting all Soviet space claims. So if the Soviets claim that no flight was happened, it stands to possible that that the American stations did track it, but didn't report it and are classified. I could be wrong, and I do reserve the right to be wrong. The possibility that I might be wrong. So there you go, Mr. Oberg. Something to possibly disprove the American policy. And also, I don't think the United States would have wanted to gloat over a Soviet space failure. And I never really got the chance to explain this in the documentary, but I think that the United States would not want to point at the Soviets' failed space flights, alleged failed space flights, and say, "Ha ha, you guys are you communists are inferior," because at the time, space was the most dangerous thing possible. The Mercury 7 astronauts were going to do something that had never been done before, and something that people thought would be impossible, and if tried, certain death. So I kind of think that this is a theory. This is a theory of mine. I think that the United States might have wanted to keep their mouths shut about Soviet space failures, because if the American public found out that there were human deaths in space before Alan Shepard became the first astronaut, they might have had second thoughts about the Mercury 7 going into space and demanded that they cancel Project Mercury and not risk any American lives. And in those days, public support was absolutely vital for NASA, because they were getting their funding from Congress, and Congress was getting the funding from the American taxpayer. This is one of those additional examples, additional explanations that I wanted to introduce to this, and that is the alleged lost cosmonaut moving away from the Earth. The critics of the lost cosmonauts are quick to say that the Vostok spacecraft would never have gone to escape velocity. Had it been so, the Soviets would have beaten us to the moon. Which is true, but it can still raise its altitude and look like it was moving away from the Earth. And if this lost cosmonaut did exist, it's you could make the argument that the Cordiglia brothers misinterprets an elliptical orbit for escape velocity, which obviously didn't happen. It just wasn't possible to go into escape velocity, but it could go into a high elliptical orbit. In fact, the plan for Vostok 7 was to go into such an orbit. But that was canceled when the Americans announced Project Gemini, and Khrushchev wanted to get a multi-man crew up into space, and the first spacewalk to beat the Americans to the punch, which was, let's face it, it was kind of cheap. The Vostok turned Voskhod spacecraft was, it was laughable. The Vostok was a very good spacecraft. It was without a doubt superior to Mercury. The American Mercury spacecraft, that is. It could stay in space longer. There was more elbow room. It was also, well, the Soviets did a lot better than the Americans in the first round, although Vostok, failed to maintain Soviet supremacy in the space race. I do think that the Russians found their place in space by long duration space flight. Because when they lost the race to the moon, they focused on space stations and long duration, and the Salyut program couldn't have gotten off to a worse start. But the game changer was Salyut 6 and Salyut 7, and that's where they found their success. They actually went further than they had thought with the Salyut program, and that carried on to the International Space Station. It would save the United States and European Space Agency years of long duration space flight that the Russians could just simply provide. Yeah, and with this second Lost Cosmonaut, the data presented to their father and Dr. Judica-Cordiglia. This is a couple of things, a couple of additional explanations I wanted to bring, especially this one. I mean, I kind of wanted to say that if there was a cosmonaut suffocating up there, an easy explanation for that would have been a premature detachment of the instrument module, because that had all the life support and the engine to get back home. Vostok orbits were launched. The spacecrafts were launched into an orbit that would decay in 10 days if the cosmonaut was unable to complete retrofire and get back to Earth. However, the instrument pack had to be on. I mean, if the instrument pack was off, then the cosmonaut had no chance. And then there's also the mention here of the probe. That's an actual picture of the probe before it went off, or is that the counterpart? I can't remember. This is the New York Times article on February 4th. And what I'm kind of, suggesting here is that possibly some people who might want to disprove the Lost Cosmonauts say it was on the 4th because the explanation would have been, it was the probe. So I kind of wanted to say that, hey, it wasn't the 4th. It couldn't possibly have been the 4th. So, possible misdirection. It's possible, not confirmed. And the next one coming up is probably the most famous recording by the Cordiglia brothers. Brian Dunning, who... No, Oberg is a respectable professional. Dunning's a joke. I'm not afraid to say that. And you'll see that in a minute. And this is actually footage of Valentina Tereshkova, not the alleged female cosmonaut, obviously. So I basically just put that in there just for impression, for the sake of art. But anyway, it's interesting that when you hear this recording, but before I get into that, I kind of want to say that this is an additional explanation that some of the conspiracy theorists have not brought up, saying that if it was correct, if the recording was correctly translated, then this is an explanation as to what was possibly the case. I also wanted to address the ejection handle and the bolts in the hatch, because if they were flawed and they missed it before launch, and they saw it, and basically a means that would probably force a hard landing inside the spacecraft. That's the explanation I wanted to do. What were they trying to do to possibly bring this alleged lost cosmonaut home? Maybe they were possibly thinking of an ocean landing, but the way that Soviet orbits were launched, that meant splashdown had to be somewhere in the Southeast Pacific or the Mid-Atlantic Ocean, and it would have to be a task force. And good luck trying to organize one of those before the air supply ran out. The translations, a lot of people are split on the translations, and of course I put the subtitles down there, basically the way that they've been translated. I myself am about to take Russian, so once I learn that, I will make the translations for myself. And a lot of the critics of the Lost Cosmonauts say that this was by no means proper radio protocol. But then again, if you're running out of air supply and you're about to die from carbon dioxide poisoning, I honestly don't think that proper protocol is the first thing on your mind right now, especially since the effects of excessive CO2 are they're there. I mean, just talk to people who've experienced it. As far as the translations are concerned, it's very simple. I mean, if you were to go back to the original posted documentary, or any of these recordings on YouTube for that matter, you'll see that the words for I am hot, I feel hot, that kind of stuff was actually sounded like different words in the Russian form. A lot of people think that this is Maria Therese, the sister of the Cordiglia brothers, making this into a hoax, or it could be her making very, very amateur translations. I mean, translating multiple phrases into simply "I feel hot." I mean, when I learn the Russian myself, I will be able to translate for myself. But it's possible that this alleged lost cosmonaut was saying something along the lines of "I'm burning up," "It's hot as hell in here," that kind of stuff, and that just translates all the time to "I am hot," especially for somebody who wouldn't have that much, who would not be the best interpreter of Russian. I do have a professor who speaks Russian, but I don't think he really has time to look at that. But I'm planning on learning Russian so that I can look at the Russian material in my studies for potential PhD. There's even a program I'm going into. Now, James Oberg is a professional who should be respected, but Dunning is just a quack, and if he's listening to this, I really don't care what his opinions are, because I don't, the dual flights. The dual flights of Vostok 3 and 4, which never gets any attention from Americans, that is, they were launched within a day of each other. And, they're confirmed events that every historian agrees on, and he comes out and say that they couldn't have done it in a month. Now, a good counter-argument to that would probably be that they had prepared for the dual flight in advance, but then you can kind of come back and say, that all Vostok flights were planned, and all the rockets made prior to the final plans being made, something like that. So I find it, I actually found the criticism of the Lost Cosmonauts weakened by Dunning's arguments. So it really got me thinking, what's really going on? Why is he saying that they couldn't have gotten them off within a month when they were able to get them off in a day? And, why is German Titov, wearing a spacesuit with Gagarin, if they had to scavenge Gagarin's spacesuit? It makes no sense. Although, when I do point out the footage of Gagarin and Titov wearing their spacesuits together, it painfully reminds me of those moon landing hoax conspiracy theorists doing the exact same thing with the footage of the moon landing. And no, I am not a moon landing hoax conspiracy theorist. We went to the moon. Plain and simple. It is the most disproven conspiracy theory ever, and yet the people who believe it are really, really stubborn. I mean, more stubborn than any other conspiracy theory I've ever seen. More stubborn than the 9/11 conspiracy theory crowd. More stubborn than the JFK assassination crowd. It's the moon landing hoax conspiracy theory is the most disproven conspiracy theory ever, and yet it has some of the most stubborn and ignorant followers. You really can't convince these guys. Although I have been thinking of doing another amateur documentary about how the moon landing hoax conspiracy theory is, complete bullshit. But the moon landing hoax conspiracy crowd would refuse to watch it for fear that I might prove them wrong. I see all their videos on YouTube. They don't have a clue. Of course, I could give my reasons as to why they're so stubborn with this, but I won't spoiler in this commentary, except to say that when I do give my explanation for it, which I have yet to hear from anybody else, I do think it's going to piss a lot of the moon landing conspiracy hoax crowd off real bad. And if that happens, I have done my job with it. I will say this. So, like I said, process of elimination. We've declassified, Soviet tragedies like the Nedeling catastrophe and Soyuz 1. They tried to cover up Soyuz 1, but they failed. Word got out. And it's very hard to cover something up if you open the public to space flights as they happen. Yeah, this is the actual footage of Komarov crashing into Earth and getting killed. Yeah, I might do a little quick 5-minute tribute to Vladimir Komarov because if you know the story of how he wanted to protect Yuri Gagarin from getting into that spacecraft, and protecting his friend, you realize that Komarov was a very brave and very, very honorable man. I don't care that he was on the other side of the Iron Curtain. There's no denying that Komarov was a good and honorable and a very skilled cosmonaut. And I thought about doing a tribute to him that you might see sometime in the near future. And if I mentioned the abysmal start for the Salyut program, this was it. Soyuz 10, Soyuz 10, they couldn't actually get in the station, so that was an embarrassment. And you got the tragedy of Soyuz 11. But eventually the Soviets would get their act together and have some success with Salyut 6, Salyut 7, and like I said, those turned out to be great triumphs. This is the actual footage of the attempts to revive the 3 cosmonauts. Some of the other footage you saw of the launches and that Soyuz craft landing. I don't know what missions those are for. Most likely not Soyuz 11, but as I said, this was for the sake of art. And also there is Plesiosk right here. Which was, I kind of used this as an example of, history could, theoretically be erased. So, maybe, there was evidence for the Lost Cosmonauts that was completely destroyed by the Soviet Union, that James Over never got the chance to read because, they were actually absolutely destroyed. So, it is possible that that there were lost cosmonauts, but the process of elimination has disproven every other notion. So, we could possibly forever conclude that there were no lost cosmonauts, even if there were. Or you can take what I say at the end of this by saying that no disproof of the lost cosmonauts. So and then The only way it could be solved is if there were lost cosmonauts, which is not necessarily true. I mean, the answer, the evidence, has to remain credible. And I kind of saw myself renewing a little credibility to some of the evidence that otherwise has been, you know, disproven. But then again, I mean, my explanations could be shot down. And FYI, James Boberg, here's the proof I read your book, because look at the bottom of the screen when I'm mentioning Professor Siddiqui here. I actually hope to meet Professor Siddiqui. I think that he could really help me with my education. And, I mean, and so if he sees this and he's by some means not, thrilled, I apologize. This is of course a mourning ceremony, if that's what you want to call it. So I actually had fun making this documentary. The music is from incompetech.com, as I credit, which allows free music to be downloaded for videos such as this. I heard about it by watching a video from Wonder Why. He's got a great YouTube channel. Wonder Why, if you're watching this, I'll send you the link. I'm a fan of your videos, and I am a history student, so if you ever need some additional research help, then shoot me an email. And for the record, if I do any more amateur documentaries, I might get somebody else to narrate, because I keep listening to myself and I really don't have the best voice for narration. I might get somebody else to do it, although I could become a talking head in that, to give the impression of professionalism. But like I said, I mean, it'd be amateur documentary, and this is by no means it's amateur. And the following ones would be amateur ones. If you guys want to see any more of those YouTube videos, more of my amateur documentaries, I'd be more than willing to make more. Thank you for watching the documentary and the commentary, and may the force be with you.